guys now. And as I mentioned, this is a workshop really just to dive into the common mistakes that I've seen out there in the industry from my experience in software sales and also as an entrepreneur. And this is stuff that I've done and seen others consistently do. So with that, I'll go ahead and kick us off and just dive right in with some of these common mistakes that are out there. And so you guys can all see my screen, thumbs up. Cool. And some of you are familiar with Empowered Offerings. I see some familiar faces out here, but the branding and all the stuff in the background is for this Business Accelerator program that my friend Jason and I are launching in February. And if folks are curious about that at the end, we can chat a little bit about it. But these are the 5 most common mistakes that I have seen out there around presentations. And again, this is when you're making an offer, whether it's enrolling somebody in a coaching program, offering a training or a workshop, or just really trying to kind of like pitch an idea to a group, to colleagues. Maybe you're presenting in a board meeting, you're trying to get budget for your program, whatever it is. These cut across all these spaces. And I'll dive into a little bit more detail with each of these. But the first is features before benefits. The second is too much or too little of yourself, kind of finding that Goldilocks spot of like being a human, but not telling your whole life story. Using jargon, which I see all the time, buzzwords and all that jazz. Not understanding your audience, which actually has a lot of nuance and complexity to it. And I don't know I'll have time to go into all the detail of that particular one, but we'll touch some high level concepts of that. And pacing, length, and timing, which is sort of like they kind of group together as a kind of little subset of things that we often miss the mark with when we're showing up to share an offer. And so we'll start at the top, this features before benefits idea. And this was something that I really learned the hard way in the software industry first, but I've seen how it translates to entrepreneurship really kind of one-to-one. And what I mean by features before benefits is like we're often, as the builders of the thing or the advocate of the product, we're really excited about like how it does stuff, all the bells and whistles. Oh, it like, does your invoicing and, makes your coffee and, submits your taxes to your accountant. Like we're always talking about all the things we're excited about that our product or offer does. But what our customers really care about is like what they get out of it. And so it's always more helpful to lead with like what it does for them instead of how it does it. Right? So that's really just a simple reframe that has so much power to connect with an audience. Because we're assuming when we're talking about all these fancy features and ideas that they care about the same things that we care about, and they might not. And that doesn't mean that we don't tell people how something works. Obviously, they're going to want to know, how is it a video call? Are we meeting in person? Does it make my coffee or submit my invoices, right? They want to learn the mechanics of the product, but only after they've understood why it will be valuable to them to have it in the first place. And I think this comes from a really good place. The intentions are great here. Like I said, if we're offering something to somebody, ideally it should be because we love it and we're excited about it, but we don't want to fall into the trap of letting our excitement and enthusiasm for the offering kind of blind us to the reality that it's all about what the customer wants instead of what we believe is valuable. And those assumptions can really get in the way of making a connection and establishing value right at the beginning of a conversation with somebody when you're making an offer. So it's a really simple reframe, just making sure that you're talking more about what it does than how it does it. So what it does is the benefits, how it does it are the features. And yeah, just leading with that and checking out your copy, checking out your messaging, and just editing with that idea in mind. Like, oh, am I talking too much about the mechanics of this process here? Should I be talking more about the impact, right? So instead of saying, like, for example, with this Empowered Offerings program, we could say, oh, we meet every week and we connect you with a community of peers and you have buddy support for the program and you have like supportive dialogue and kind of workshopping. Those are all features, right? They're important, they're powerful, they sell. But what's more powerful is to say like, you'll benefit from the support of a community of peers on the same journey as you. You'll have regular accountability for the projects that you're struggling to complete on your own, right? Do you see how that slight shift in language tells somebody exactly what's going to change in their lives as a result of the program? Instead of just talking about like, oh, wow, that sounds like a lot of time on my schedule to be committing to this thing. You know, it's a slight shift and it can really make a big difference. And I'll come back to this later, but what's in it for them and what they get out of it kind of has a fun little acronym or way to remember it. In the United States, at least, radio stations have letters as their kind of call sign, like WMMR or WJAZ, something like that. And the only radio station you need to ever tune into when it comes to making an offer or product is WIIFM, which stands for What's in It for Me. So always be thinking about what their customer wants to hear is that WIIFM radio station. And if we're focusing too much on the benefits, it's really about what we're excited about, what we want to make the offer. Common mistake number 2, too much or too little of yourself. And this has a bit of a subjective nature to it. Don't take everything I say here as gospel, because I think there's a way to do this with grace and in a number of different directions. But the tendency that a lot of us have, again, it comes back to our subjectivity and our bias. We tend to focus like a lot on our own story and our own reasons for coming into something, because especially as entrepreneurs, if we're lucky enough to be running a values-driven business, a lot of times like our principles, our ideals are really like embedded in our work, and we're really kind of operating from that perspective. But it's only effective in enrolling somebody if we can directly tie that to their experience, to put ourselves in their shoes and imagine, where does my story meet theirs, right? So like if you're focusing first on their story as a frame to tell yours, that's going to have a lot more power than just talking about all the reasons why you were excited to quit your job and do this thing, or all the reasons why you want what you want or did what you did. Matter less than finding ways to meet somebody out where they're in their shoes, like saying, hey, when I was in your position with this choice had meaning for me for these reasons, right? And we've all read copy that's like that, you know, like where you feel empathized with, where you feel seen and met. And this is really important for all kinds of enrollment as well, like with the kind of benign examples I mentioned at the beginning, like, you know, getting somebody to go to the restaurant you want. It's like, hey, I know the last time we had, you know, Mexican food, you got really bloated from the beans. Wouldn't it be nice to switch to rice tonight and just do sushi? You see, like you're putting their context in like tying it directly to your desire. So always watching for ways to do that can benefit us for erring on that side. And I see this a lot. I actually saw this a lot in the group that I just had for Empowered Offerings, which had some amazing solopreneurs in it, people launching incredible things in the world, especially when we're just putting ourselves out there. Our imposter syndrome can show up and really want to make us prove our worth to others by focusing on our credentials and our training and our experience. And the truth is, people usually don't give a crap about that stuff. They care more about like, that's when you bring in your why, your personal story, your passion, your journey. That narrative sells a lot more than the trainings you did or the workshops you took, or like why you're qualified to run this thing. That's where you really bring in your personal story, and trying to emphasize that over your credentials matters more every single time. So my credentials are still on my website. They're way down at the bottom because nobody really even knows what the International Coach Federation is. Let's be honest. They don't care. They want to hear why I'm passionate about my work. And again, making your story relevant to their experience. That's if you take nothing else from this slide, that's the piece. How can you tie it in to their story? And how can you make it fun? How can you show, if I forget, I think it's the movie Office Space where the guy's wearing like 56 pieces of flair, right? How could you bring your flair to your story? How could you show some sparkle, some shine, some element of humor or personality that somebody knows they're getting something specifically from you that they couldn't get anywhere else, right? It's that Maya Angelou quote all over again. People will forget what you said. They'll forget what you did. They'll never forget how you made them feel. So how did you make them feel when they read your invitation? Did they feel like they were talking to an interesting, grounded, humorous, engaging human being, or somebody who was really concerned about whether or not they were going to buy the thing or not? It's up to you. Common mistake number 3, using jargon, which I am super duper guilty of. So this one's like very much a growth area for me. Case in point, when I titled this workshop, I initially called it Common Mistakes We Make When Pitching. Guess what pitching is? Sales jargon. Presenting an offer is normal human being language that describes the process and leaves all the baggage of what pitching means out of the picture. Because people think of pitching and they think of baseball and used car salesmen, and neither of them have anything to do with this workshop. So thinking about ways that you can filter your language, again, to remove your bias, remove your perspective, and remove your buzzwords and all the rest of it, and just talk like a normal person. And if you feel like you're so enmeshed in the work that you're doing that that's really hard to do, give it to a friend who isn't really part of the work that you're doing, or like maybe you have like a young cousin or a friend's kid, like a middle school kid, like get them to read it. Be like, hey, what in here? Like, do you see any words that you don't know what they mean? Yeah, I have no idea what juicy means. Is that like, like what is that doing in there, right? I see that a lot in kind of the spiritual communities and new agey kind of places where I hang out, and juicy gets passed around a lot. Nobody knows what juicy means. Like, why is that in your copy? And no acronyms, please. If it's like a bunch of letters that are clever and spell out a word to people who know what it means, ironically, like if you know, IFKYK, you see that a lot on the internet. Don't use stuff like that. Spell it out. Keep it really clean, keep it really simple, try to drop the jargon. And again, if you're struggling to do this, you can talk to somebody who has no idea what you're talking about and get them to read it. Or better yet, and we'll come back to this later, interview a customer. Use their words. Ask them questions that get them to describe their problem to you, and then use their words to describe the solution. And I did this in an early stage of building my coaching business. And frankly, it was fantastic. I had all these assumptions about what I thought people wanted. And really the only thing that came out of these conversations with potential customers was people were feeling anxious. And they wanted to address the sense of anxiety and dread that they had around making choices. I had no idea that's how they described it. So then I started talking about anxiety and relieving that and feeling clarity, instead of anxiety in my copy. And it worked. And just getting to the point, trying to really minimize the number of words you're using, that like run-on sentences to describe something. Can you really drill it down and boil it down to the essence of what you need to say? Common mistake number 4, not understanding your audience. I alluded to that a little bit with the customer interviews here. That's sort of a big solution to this. But again, as I think especially passionate entrepreneurs are guilty of this, people who are really proud of what they offer are guilty of this. Like, we really are just blinded by our own perspective around what's valuable to other people. And there's a funny saying in business world, they say that or something to the effect of like, the best laid business plans never survive their first contact with customers, right? Like we're thinking about all the things instead of testing the waters first. So listening first, listening often, listening deeply, being willing to research, being willing to kill your darlings because you've just been basing it on things that you believe are true that you never checked out with your audience first, being willing to go back to the drawing board and how you're framing something to realign with what a customer truly wants, because you've taken the time to deeply listen to them and understand them first, can set you miles apart from other people in the space that you're in. Just the customers will feel seen and heard by you, and that will engender immediate trust. It really is the foundation. It's a relational practice of just listening before you talk and being willing to tailor and adjust your presentation to your audience. So if I was going to give, I offer authentic relating workshops in a number of different spaces, and authentic relating is kind of like a relational framework used for communication. When I'm offering a workshop to, for example, like an intentional community in Central America, I use different language than I do to pitch it as a leadership development and communication training for a tech company, right? I'm willing to adjust the language, personalize it, customize it, try to use tone words or mirroring the things that I know that customer cares about when I'm describing the impact and benefits of that process for them. And it doesn't take a lot of time, but it's always worth the effort to do it. And I love this idea of the platinum rule, which is definitely an upgrade over the golden rule and helps us mitigate these biases. The platinum rule is treat others how they want to be treated, right? We all walk around saying, oh, treat others how you want to be treated. What if other people, don't like what you like? What if they're chocolate milk people and you're oat milk? Like you don't want to operate on those types of assumptions. You need to give people what they actually want instead of what you think they do. So clarifying those before you go out and build a whole army of Facebook ads and spend a ton of money can save you a lot of headache in the long run. Common mistake number 5. And I would love to hear your feedback on this one at the end on how I did, because this is also a struggle for me, is pacing and timing. And the good news is you get better at it over time, but it's always really hard to maintain an awareness of our audience and an awareness of ourselves at the same time. It's kind of a master skill to be able to check in with ourselves. How am I sounding? What is my pace and tone? And also kind of keep your attention a little bit outward, attuned to the group. Ooh, am I losing people? Am I moving too fast? Are they leaning in? Are they checking out? So really attuning with your audience, reading the room. Body language can be really important. I know that's hard on Zoom, especially when folks don't have their cameras on. So you can use things like the chat, like, hey, what do you guys think about what I'm saying? Share one word of impact that's coming up for you, right? Or can I get a thumbs up if this is making sense, right? You can use cues to engage with people and prime them to give you feedback, even in a digital space, to really kind of read how what you're saying is landing. And paying attention to your breath is a huge, huge help. And it's something that we always, well, I don't want to say we, I say me, always forget. It's like, oh yeah, I shouldn't be talking so fast that I'm getting out of breath. Like you don't need to talk that fast. Never be talking so fast that your breath is catching on you. You want to be really even in your pacing so that, you're not stressing yourself out and your audience will notice. You can, however, vary your cadence for effect, right? So you can pause, right? That this sense of a pregnant pause, right? It like people are like, what? He stopped talking. What happened? Right? So you can vary the cadence when you're trying to make a point about something, right? So you're speeding up and slowing down, giving the quality of your speech or your presentation a bit of texture keeps people checked in. And you've all been in some presentation. I guarantee you can name a time when you've just sat there and the person's talked like this, or they're talking in a way where they're clearly reading off of the slide and they're not adding any color to it. They're just repeating the words on the page, right? It just doesn't land the same way as if you talk like with a bit more texture, a bit more variation in the pacing and tone. Because that is essentially, especially like in a digital space like this, that's the equivalent of body language. People are picking up data from you in other ways in the absence of your physical presence. And the best you can do with your voice is to just give them a little bit to lean into around that. And setting to a timer, really trying to stick to the amount of time you've committed to a process to share information. Try not to make it run over. Like even now, I noticed at the beginning, I was worried because I had spent a lot of time on the first 2 slides. I was like, oh my gosh, am I going to get this in a half hour like I said I would and leave time for Q&A? And now I'm looking at the clock. We're like 27 minutes in. Okay, great. I think we'll make it, right? So like I think we'll get through this in the time that I had allotted and maybe even a little shorter, which is great. People are always happy when something takes less time than they expected, unless it's a massage, right? So like, you really want to stick to the time that you've given for something when you can. And when in doubt, slowing down is always helpful. Checking in with yourself, seeing if your attention is too inward, seeing if your attention is too outward, just maintaining that balance of awareness between your audience and yourself. And I'm in a presence training course right now, and they have this really beautiful tool to help guide our presence, and I really like it. It's super simple. It's like, do you notice your energy going forward and up, or do you notice your energy going backward and down? And just like tracking, where are you on this circle of forward and out and backward and down? And can you recalibrate yourself? Usually we're needing to recalibrate backward and down. Can you feel into your body? Are you aware of your own experience while you're in connection to people that you're trying to influence or enroll? And they'll sense the quality of your presence. If you're grounded and calm and clear, it engenders safety and trust, and people will be leaning in. If they sense you kind of all over the place and like checking your notes and freaking out and just sort of like up in your head, they'll be backing away. No matter what you're saying, there'll be a little bit of internal resistance. So just checking that process out as you go. And those are the 5. So go back to the top. I don't think I put a slide at the end. Yeah. Features before benefits. Too much of yourself, too little of yourself. Using jargon, not understanding your audience, and pacing and length. So those are the 5 big ones that I've been guilty of through my entire trajectory of sales. And I've seen a lot of people repeatedly do in my work supporting others with this, and just being on a number of different kind of sales teams in different sized organizations. These are some of the common Achilles heels in the sales and presenting process. And we'll go now to Q&A. If anybody's curious about the Empowered Offerings program that a lot of this content is based in and gets expanded upon in great detail, plus a lot of awesome stuff from my co-facilitator, Jason. This QR code will give you the landing page. We start in late February. So on the 28th, so you guys have like a month. I think we still have early bird space available, but all of you guys can also contact me after the workshop if you're curious about more info around that. But yeah, I want to open it up just to a dialogue around this stuff, for Q&A, questions from me on anything that was shared. I'd love to hear reflections from other people's experiences with this stuff too. Maybe something I missed that you were reminded of in what I shared. I really want this just to be a space where a collective wisdom gets to shine and we can all share with one another some of our common experiences with this stuff. So the floor is yours, and popcorn style, just jump in if you want to come off mute or turn on your camera and just have a little discussion about this stuff.
I would love for us to have a little conversation about pricing. I think you spoke a little bit about imposter syndrome and how common that experience is. And I think the more I connect with other folks who are trying to build a business, especially a values-based business, the more I realize we just really struggle to assert our own worth. So what guidance you have, and then what experience or guidance other folks have on the call would be really welcome as an addition to what you've offered so far.
Thanks, Sam. I think that's an amazing place to start. Who has something to say about that? I'm sure there's a bunch of perspectives in the room, but I'd love to hear from the group.
I'm happy to share, I guess. I've been an executive coach for 6 to 7 years. I guess my approach is I never share pricing prior to a sales conversation. So I don't share. So I don't have a product though that I'm offering. So that might be a little different. So I would say mine's all service-based. But the whole reason I have a spreadsheet is so that I don't undervalue myself. So I look to the spreadsheet to say, what should I be charging? And then usually in the moment, make a judgment call based on the sales conversation. So that's been my approach, is that I set prices for myself to help myself not undervalue myself. Sorry. But I never share that pricing sheet with my clients. So that's what I'll offer.
Thanks, Chris. I'm really glad you pointed to the distinction between service-based offerings and specific products, whereas maybe for specific products, it does make sense to provide pricing. Like on the Empowered Offerings page, you can see what the cost of the course is. It's very transparent versus something like a more custom coaching package. I like Chris, I don't disclose my rates for coaching until I've had a conversation with somebody. And I think, it depends on the type of offering that you're making. And I think to the imposter syndrome point, Sam, I always try to keep myself oriented to the value that this has to the customer throughout the entire process, how I'm talking about it, how I'm presenting it, and also how I'm pricing it. Because ultimately, it's not about, again, it's not about how you feel about the cost. It's about how they feel about the value. And do they believe that the process is going to give them something that's worth the amount of energy and they're exchanging with you in time and money? And if you can stay anchored to the belief in the power of your work, that helps a lot. Because I'm shaky every time I ask somebody for money, and I've been doing it for years. It has charge to it. But and I keep a list of like some of my best feedback from clients, and I'll occasionally reread that just to be like remind myself what it is that I'm doing for others and why it's valuable. Sometimes I'll do that. And I also keep a list of like no's and why people said they didn't want to work with me. So sometimes I can check in with like, how am I missing people? Where do I encounter common resistance? So I can remind myself that no is really common. People say it all the time. And it's not a big deal if somebody rejects you based on pricing. What you need to do in that moment is just get curious about how they're making that choice. It's like, oh, so I hear the money is a real issue for you here. Can we like kind of lean in and unpack that a bit? You can coach them right there on their decision if that's the product that you're offering.
Yeah, thank you for that. I just landed my first like legit paying external client. I've been doing a lot of internal coaching for the last like decade, and I'm very excited about that. And I know if you do it once, you can do it again. I'm just trying to, I want to make sure, because it was a very easy yes in this instance, I want to make sure I'm not undervaluing myself. Although what I asked for was like, it was a lot more than I thought I was going to get. So, and it's a growth experience for me as well as for the folks that I'm serving. So appreciate the sharing about it. Thanks.
Yeah, congratulations, Sam. That's exciting.
Thank you. Now I just have to do it 100 million more times so I can quit my soul-sucking day job.
I never get old. Does anybody else have a perspective on this pricing thing? Luciana, I see you came off mute.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I had a question if we were done with that topic, but I did not have a contribution to that topic. Sorry, the lighting is not good here. Yeah, I think one thing I'm curious about is, especially if we're talking about the coaching space, is, this word authenticity, right? And the idea that customers are attracted to your authenticity, that we are all becoming more and more attracted to authenticity. And then my question becomes related to one of your points of oversharing versus undersharing, right? How do I ask this question? So I see a lot of coaches presenting themselves as, this is my origin story. These are the terrible struggles I had. I overcame all of them. And now look at me, my life is amazing. And like, you can be here too, right? But I think we all know the reality is like, we're all human beings and we're always working on our shit. And we've never arrived anywhere. And for me as a coach, it's important to normalize that actually. So to me, that's an authentic presentation of like, I still struggle with things and I still use a lot of tools to help me get through those moments. And sometimes I do great and sometimes it totally fails, right? And it's like, I would like to be able to connect with people to normalize that, but I'm just, if we're in this conversation about like marketing and presentation, I'm just curious to know what people think about that and what, if anyone has had experiences with that level of authenticity with clients.
Beautifully said. Thanks, Luciana. And I get a lot of resistance to like the whitewashing in the coaching industry too. I'm like, I don't promote any of my stuff on Instagram because I don't even want to wade into that water. It's like so anathema to me to just be like, oh yeah, look at my life. I'm drinking a beer on the beach in Bali. Like, good for me. Like it. Anyway.
Yeah, icky is the word that comes up for me.
Yeah, I would love to hear others chime in. I'm talking way too much.
What you said, Luciana, really resonates with me. My niche is mission-driven healers, helpers, and leaders. And I position the work that I do with them as helping them to do the work in the world, to do their work to heal the world without harming themselves. So the only way that I'm ever going to get a doctor or a psychiatrist or a nurse or a hospital executive to listen to me is if I tell them about my own experiences with burnout and how I'm working through it actively. Otherwise, their first response is going to be, who on earth are you to talk to me about my life? If your life's so great, you can't relate to me, let alone help me. So it's interesting. I have found the need to lean into that, which is really great, because to position myself otherwise would have felt horribly icky, to use your word. And I got myself on Instagram, but I don't share me. I share things that inspire me, things that are moving in me, things that add value for other people. And thank you, Gabe, because we had an early conversation when I was first in my coactive coaching training, where you really shared the value that had had for building your business too. So I'm trying to come from that place rather than the beach in Bali place. Nice as that looks, it's not for me.
So do you share some of your current personal struggles around burnout, for example, when you have one-on-one conversations, but not as a social media advertising approach, is what you're saying?
So I don't go deeply into my personal struggle. I will just say, I've been in this world. I know that it is broken and that it breaks people, and I'm still navigating the impact of that. And that is what makes me passionate about being here with you, because there are other ways, right? So not getting too much into the detail of it, but enough to just say, to come around to their side of the table and sit down with them, rather than it feeling like we're opposite.
Beautifully spoken, Sam. I love it. And I want to highlight one thing in that really stands out to me is how you're framing it as ongoing, right? And that this is still a process that's unfolding for you. And I think that's the really powerful part of that messaging. It reminds me of a good friend of mine who's also a coach, and she brands herself as a recovering perfectionist, which I love, because there's a ing on that, right? Not a recovered perfectionist, a recovering, right? So this process is still ongoing. And I think that speaks exactly to what you're saying, Sam, that there's a deeper trust in somebody who's acknowledges that they're still doing the work. And the way you talked about sharing it, I think is beautiful, right? And Luciana, sharing it in a way that feels authentic to you is probably the best guidance that you know what I mean? I would go to your class on how to market yourself authentically through sharing your struggle, right? It's, you have that compass, and leaning into that is going to bring the people to you who are right for what you offer every time.
I mean, I'll add on to what Sam said. I mean, I coach CEOs, CFOs, C-level, and I've never been a C-level executive. So I can never tell a story where I've got it figured out from that perspective. But I think what Sam was hitting on is you can tell a story about why you care about those people and what it is that you want to bring to them. And that's the story that matters. It doesn't necessarily have to be about your overcoming of something. It can just be why you care.
Thanks for that, Chris. It was really powerful. Do any of the voices that we haven't heard in the space yet have something to add to this, or have another question that they want to bring? We got 20 minutes left, guys. I'll wait. Either that, or I could just walk away assuming that everything I said was perfectly crystal clear and answered every question you had about this, and there's no stone left unturned, which feels amazing because I did that in under time and kind of shot from the hip.
I'll ask another question.
Thanks, Luciana. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm curious to know more about, market research for coaches, kind of loosely, how do you approach that, right? Is it just like saying to one of your clients, like, hey, would you mind spending half an hour with me on the phone? And I just want to ask you some questions. Do people feel more comfortable writing it for you? What have people experienced with that?
Thanks for that question. I have kind of a conventional approach to this. I'm sure there's lots of ways to do it, where I use the concept of kind of like a customer avatar, or like this ideal kind of like version of a client. And sometimes it's an actual client. Like I have a client right now who's like literally my ideal client. And so I just kind of use them when I'm thinking about the people I want to reach in my messaging. But the way that I conducted this process was I actually just went out onto the internet to places where I thought my clients would be. And this is part of what I teach in the Empowered Offerings workshops, is like this idea of hubs. You can make things a lot easier for yourself if you're going to places where people are already connecting around a set of shared values or ideas that you think overlaps with the either psychographic or demographic profile of your ideal customer. I use psychographic profile because it's like, what are they thinking and feeling is more important to me than their, background. And I just go to those communities and I'll actually be really candid and I'll say, hey, this is what I do. I'm a coach. I'm trying to develop a new product to help people like the people in this space. And I want to interview a few of you on how you describe your challenges with making important life choices or avoiding burnout in your workplace or blah, blah, blah. Like, what is the specific problem you're trying to address? And just ask that community online or through your friends, say like, hey, I'm looking to talk to on LinkedIn, right? On Facebook, I'm looking to talk to X person about X challenge. Can I interview you, for 15 minutes? And if we have time at the end, maybe we'll do like 10 minutes of spot coaching or something, like you don't have to offer a free value. A lot of times people are just happy to talk about their problems to somebody, an unbiased listener is valuable to many on its own. And I just recorded the interviews or just typed up notes. And I had a bunch of questions about like, how do you want to address this challenge? What would it mean to you to solve it? What would change in your life as a result of this being different? And I just kind of, through those conversations, learned how people both framed the challenge, how they thought about it, and what they wanted in a solution. So they were just really simple conversations with people who, some of whom I never talked to again. A handful actually became paying clients. One of my best clients I ever had came out of that process. Not because I was trying to sell them coaching either. Like, I'm genuinely not on this call to offer you anything. But that person was like curious. They're like, well, can you keep in touch and let me know when you have this thing ready? And I'm like, yeah, I will. I'll email you if you want. And then I followed up and they were ready at that time to engage in deeper work. So that's how I did it. But again, I'm sure there's, you could maybe talk to a client you already have, or, somebody who's already maybe working with a coach, but like is doing the thing that you want to do, as long as there's, I honestly don't even think there needs to be a personal relationship there. I think people just love to talk about themselves and their issues. It's kind of easy to start those conversations. I was surprised, at least when I did it, how quickly I got people booking slots. I did about 30 or 40 of them in a period of maybe 2 or 3 months when I first started my coaching practice.
Okay. I will jump in here before I have to probably get off the call, but I'm really appreciating, I work as an intimacy coach, and right now I'm not doing too much. Well, I'm sort of doing networking, but not enough. So it's just so satisfying to work, just to hear from people who get it, like who are in this, up and down and roller coaster, and sometimes schlep and sometimes like exhilarating thing. I'll throw in, so I've been at it for a little while now, and I'm really impressed, Gabe, to hear the extent to which you did market research. I did a much more scaled down, labor less intensive version in anticipation of launching some groups in February, where I just polled my newsletter. So I have a newsletter of about 1,000, it's like maybe a little above 1,000 or a little below, but it's about that. And very few people are active. But I still got meaningful data by saying, and I asked like 4 questions. It took 60 seconds. Would you be interested in a group? Yes or no? So I'm planting a seed there for pitching the group. But then I said, what are the topics that are up for you that you would want to focus on in the group? And then, what are the podcast themes that you want in 2022? And then I had an open-ended one. Anything else you want me to know? Which was quite interesting. But it didn't require me to set up sessions. I didn't do any FaceTime. I gave them a deadline. I got 25 responses. Still meaningful. If I get 25 people in the group or whatever I end up doing, that's great. So I don't even really do much market research at this point, but I did that little piece and it was helpful.
Thanks for that, Jessica. I definitely, like I said, this is just one approach. Erring on the side of simplicity is often just as valuable as having extra data. So I really appreciate you bringing that in, that it doesn't need to be as labor intensive as that was. And that was a lot of work to do. I don't really want to repeat it ever again, although I probably should from time to time. But your point is well taken. Like if you have any type of audience or just simple questions you could ask, describe your challenge in one word, blah, blah, blah. Like you can get some meaningful data. Thanks, Ivana. Ciao. Yeah, and thanks for that, Jessica. I appreciate your reframe to my somewhat masochistic invitation to people to book 40 calls a month. It was during the peak of the pandemic. I had nothing else to do. So everybody was online. We have space for a few more questions, reflections, if anybody has them. Or maybe anything that went against something that you actually think would be more effective, right? Like, where did I contradict your existing opinion on the subject? And do you have a kind of different approach than what I mentioned?
I have a couple of things just for the sake of nobody else is talking. One of them is slightly off topic. You talked about the presence workshop you're doing. Is it presencing?
Yeah, it's on presence.
Presence. And you said that if you're going forward and up or backward and down, which one is the most, I guess the balanced position is what you're seeking, is neither going forward and up. Would that be like more like on rails? And then backward and down might be going kind of like inward and introverted?
Yeah, I think it's just a tool for attunement, like how much of our bandwidth is out up here and how much of our bandwidth is like kind of absorbed by our internal experience. And so it's, I don't know that I think we usually need to be moving backward and down into our bodies because we're a very rational thinking head-based culture. But I don't think that there's necessarily like one of them is really bad and the other's really good. It's just sort of giving you a really easy calibration technique to say like, am I aware of myself and other simultaneously? What balance of my attention is inward versus outward? Self-awareness and situational awareness, are they kind of like, working in collaboration, or is one sort of sucking all the air out of the room for you in that moment?
Yeah, I really found that diagram, that demonstration very helpful because I'm very somatically based. Like I'm like, oh yeah, I can pull myself back in, or am I too far back?
Right. Like for me, for example, right now, like I'm in this space with all of you and I'm paying attention to what my feet feel like, because that's like down there. That's at the bottom of my body. Like, my feet are a little clammy. So I'm like tracking my internal experience just to keep me rooted while I'm also paying attention to the room, like what's the engagement? Are people ready to leave? Are there more questions? Right. So there's a boop, boop kind of happening.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks for your question.
So,
And on the subject, I mean, I am okay to wrap us up if there genuinely are no other questions or comments around this stuff.
I do have a question, another question. Yeah. So I was checking out your website and just curious about my story, and the importance of us sharing our stories as coaches.
Yeah.
And just curious about with that, how you decided on the length, and how you decided what was important to share.
That's an interesting question. I actually ended up, I think I wrote that. It was also kind of, I think it was in response to like a kind of friendly challenge from a fellow coach, because I had told them that story kind of like in a breakout group like this, and they were just like, you got to write that. And I was like, I had never considered it because it felt like hubris to me to do that. I was like, no, nobody cares about that. And they're like, no, that's your story. You need to tell that. And I was like, okay, I'll do that. And so I think I stretched myself to this place where like, it felt like a borderline uncomfortable amount of time. Like I pictured myself telling that story on a first date and was like, would I be boring this person to tears and seeming like a total narcissist? Or would I be giving them enough information to like feel excited about me and interested, but not totally alienated because I was just like taking up all the space in the conversation? And I remember thinking about it as I was writing it, like how much is like an entertaining and engaging amount of detail that doesn't like totally make it seem like this is the Gabe show, even though it low key is the Gabe show. It's like, it shouldn't feel that way. That was kind of where I came from with that. But I think it's going to be up to you, right? How does it feel when you read it, when somebody else reads it? I didn't do like a word count or anything. I was just like, what are the big elements of this thematically that again are important for a potential client to read in this story? You know, what are the elements they're going to find resonance with, and how am I threading that in? You know, that was the approach that I took. And it's a really intimate experience. You know, it's challenging. I can sense that it, at least in my perception of you right now, that there's like a kind of feeling around this of like, I know I need to and I want to, but there's also like a stickiness to it. And I think that's really part of its potency, is like when we have the bravery to speak our truth and to show up in that way, like we give people permission to take up space as well. You know, I think it's important to share our stories, because that's how we really build connection. Like I'm a huge advocate of narrative and storytelling as a means to building deeper relationship. And maybe Chris has something to say about this from his experience inside of teams, but I use it in my work with organizations as well. Like narrative is a powerful unifying force for a group of individuals that share a mission too, right? So like we can leverage it in all kinds of different contexts. But maybe that's a little off topic for your question.
I mean, Gabe, you said something during your presentation that I took a note on, that I think is relevant here. You said it's where my story meets theirs.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been working on a rebrand recently, and it's taking a lot of time, but I'm trying to tell the story of my client and understand their story. And I don't think that I'd be able to tell a relevant story about myself until I really understand the story of my client. Because otherwise it's like, if I just tell a story about myself, it may not relate to what I'm trying to connect with them around. So I guess my feedback would be, if you can tell the story of your client first, then it becomes more clear about what story you might want to tell about yourself.
Yeah, thank you. I like that perspective a lot. I think part of my question, and maybe I wasn't clear, probably just goes back to this authenticity piece, which is, so you know how on job interviews, they're like, and what would you say your weaknesses are, right? And you're like, oh, well, let me just list some things that are actually secretly strengths, right? Because it's like, we don't actually want to list our weaknesses, even when we're directly asked this question. And so I think, you know, sharing our personal stories with our potential clients, I'm just seeing that piece come in, right? Like, where is this balance between just how vulnerable I get and tell you about like the things that, yeah, maybe I'm still struggling with, versus telling you about these things I struggled with because this is like, and then I emerged reborn from the flames kind of
Phoenix
thing.
from the ashes, right? Now I live on a beach in Bali and it's hard.
Right. And,
Yeah.
and I understand that's highly individual for, we each have to make that choice of like how much we want to reveal. But I think it's just such a fascinating question of like how that all lands and how we do present that with people that have never even heard of us before. Like,
there's a lot of nuance there, right? Which is why when I introduced that slide, I said there's a lot of subjectivity here. There's no gospel, right?
Yeah, I want to jump in because such a good question. We talk a lot about be a human and allow yourself to be imperfect. But I think like on the other side of that, if I read someone's website and their story, it's almost like they're asking me to support them. There's a degree of like, oh, I'm really struggling. I have a friend who's a coach and her posts are like, God, you should be paying me to read this post. It's not attractive. Like save that for your support groups.
Right.
And so I get a lot of appreciation for my About Me page because I did go ahead and really enjoyed framing my story. But I did it like in a bird's eye view in a way. I didn't go into the nitty gritty. But I took my time. I feel like that's the place where if they're clicking on that link, they want to meet me. And then I have a separate link for services. I find it interesting on some people's, here's the other side of it, About Me page. They're really just talking about what they do. So I think it's lovely to say first of all, I work in mental health and there's a lot of Dr. Tartaro does, so it's like, no, you're going to meet me on my About Me page, but I'm not going to ask you to, hold me here. Yeah.
Well said.
I all of that. Yes, Jessica, I'm definitely checking out your About Me page, and I work in mental health now too. So yes.
Yeah, and I like your call out to the third person, right? Dr. Tataro versus I, right? There's these little frames in it. And yeah, I see a little bit of what you're talking about too, Jessica, where this authentic relating space that I spend a lot of time in, it seems like sometimes the theme is like the vulnerability Olympics. And it's not necessarily that like it has a time and a place. It's really powerful when people are able to express themselves in that way. And it's also kind of just, it's a bit of a turnoff in, repeated, what's the word I'm looking for? Just when it's kind of happening all the time and it feels like a race to be the most vulnerablest. And again, yeah, the authenticity comes from your knowing what's right for you, right? And kind of trusting that compass of how you want to be sharing yourself with the world.
And Jessica, what you said made me think about, so I worked with kids in mental health for a while, and the whole idea of like parenting and attachment, right? And it's like, well, if a parent is chronically like anxious or having mental health issues, they can't be kind of the safe place for the child, right? And oftentimes it's almost like with people coming for coaching, they're looking kind of for their safe place, right? And so they're probably wanting someone who's not appearing like they're still chronically a mess all the time.
Pretty much.
You'll attract a lot of codependent clients who are really excited to take care of you.
Yeah, who are you calling in with your copy, right? Like what are you speaking to? Oh, that's a great point. Well, I know we're almost at time here, folks. So if anybody has to dip out as a hard stop at the top of the hour, please feel free to excuse yourself. Want to keep the floor open though. I'm okay to go a little over if folks have any more questions or just want to touch on maybe one more subject around this. I'm happy to make space for it, especially for folks who have been sort of laying back on this one. I'd really love to hear your voice in the space if you feel called to share anything in a final reflection.
I thought of a quick question. So I'll try to make this brief, which is about testimonials. I also skimmed your website, Gabe, and you feature a lot of testimonials, and I'm redoing my website to feature more testimonials. But I work in kind of a confidential field. I see that you put photos. Is there like a best practices for testimonials? Like you do want a photo, you want a name, you want what they do for work. I'm just, it's tricky for me to ask for testimonials. I kind of hate doing it. Like, so, yeah, I had someone say to me right before this, tearfully, how much I helped him. And I was like, I can't turn around and be like, could you put that on paper? You know, on the one hand. And on the other hand, I am going to write him later and ask for a testimonial. But I just wonder, you know, I can get through my kind of discomfort around doing that. And I've sent a few requests. Any sort of best practices as far as featuring testimonials so that they really are, you know, effective on a website?
Great question. I think I benefit from not having to comply with like OSHA standards or anything in my work as a coach. It's a relatively unregulated field. And so if I were a person visiting a mental health professional's website who was like a licensed therapist or psychologist, I probably wouldn't feel the need to like believe a testimonial was valid or I'm sorry, let me read from that. I wouldn't question the validity of a testimonial if it was just like a first name and an initial and no photo, because I understand the confidentiality of the client in that context. But because coaching is such an unregulated kind of shoot from the hip Wild West space right now, I was like, people aren't going to believe these are real because in some cases they like sound too good to be true and people aren't going to take this seriously. And so I asked my clients, I was like, look, like, are you willing to publicly claim the progress and the success you've made? And are you willing to share that with people who, you know, might want to work with me? And a lot of times, like when that person's on the other side of the phone, like you said, like tearful and like overcome with how much this process has meant to them, they're going to be like, hell yes, yes, let's do it. Like I found very little resistance to people wanting to share their story about our work. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about coaching is it sits next to therapy in the mental health landscape, where I know very few people who are like proud to talk about their therapist and everybody's proud to talk about their coach. And so maybe there's just some cultural dynamic that benefits coaching in that respect for collecting testimonials. But I don't think there's any rule that says you need a photo and a name and an occupation. I just went to those lengths because I know there's a lot of very well-founded skepticism about the qualification of coaches, because anybody can say they're a coach without any reason, and you just make up a website and type up a bunch of stuff that sounds good. And so I just wanted to make sure that anybody who was considering working with me knew that there was a lot of integrity and intention that went into this process, and that real people have achieved real results. Maybe it was even a bit of there was probably some saboteur or imposter working in the background there to say, like, I really have to get people to believe this is true, right? Which again is not a rule or conventional wisdom even that says you need that. So if all you can get from somebody is like initials or first name in your space, I would never, as a potential customer, question the validity of those testimonials, because I understand the difference for that field.
Yep. And I work as both. So I do this interesting kind of fluid moving, but I err on the side of the more conservative of my kind of lineages in a way. So, you know, yes, it's confidential work and I protect people's confidentiality and so on. But that's very helpful. Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you.
And thanks, Jessica. And I think somebody, maybe it was to Sam's point earlier about it was in the pricing context, right? It's like I stay connected to those stories to remind myself of like what I'm really doing. Like on the days it gets hard to do this and the days I'm tired, I'll reread those. And I don't think of it as, you know, like self-aggrandizement. Like it really keeps me rooted to my why and the power of what I'm here to do. And so like projecting that and including it at a really high level in how people encounter me on the internet, I have a strong value around that as like really important. Again, that's a personal perspective.
That's great. Thank you so much. I want to say your presentation was like, you're funny. And to me, that's like the number one selling point. Like, do I feel kind of like entertained by them? Not entertained, like you got to be a show for me, but like, am I kind of like put at ease by their sense of humor? So to me, if someone has a sense of humor, like bring that, because I think that goes such a long way to bridging our world.
Thanks, Jessica. I appreciate that. I'm having a lot of fun doing this. So for me, it's like, that's an important part. Like what energy are you bringing to the work? And I think that's part of I mentioned in that like attunement thing. It's like, what's the sparkle? What's the flair you're bringing? Does it feel good for you to share this? And can you communicate that? I really appreciate that feedback because I resonate with it every time I see it in someone else and I want to bring that. But I know we're a
I
little.
wanted to
over time.
piggyback on Jessica's statement. Yeah, it's your joy that I could pick up on. And it was, yeah, that was the joy that I picked up on.
Thank you. I really appreciate
And it was
that.
very fast and succinct.
Get to the point. Which, speaking of which, I
Exactly.
know we're a little over time. I'm sure it's late for many of you. And so just want to express my gratitude for your engagement, for taking your time to be here with me, with each other. If anybody's curious about the course, there's the link to the page. And I'll share more about that for anybody who's curious. But really, thanks guys for being here and appreciate your time.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Gabe.
Take care. Ciao.